Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Friday, the 14th of June here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Lizzie Burden. Coming up today, the Bank of Japan pushes back plans to cut its bond buying programme as the central bank keeps rates on hold.
French bonds tumble as spreads hit their widest level since 2017.
Plus, the Farage factor. A new poll puts the right-wing Reform Party overtaking the Conservatives in the UK for the first time.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The Bank of Japan has taken another step to normalisation of its ultra-loose monetary policy, but the approach has led to some uncertainty. Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more.
The Bank of Japan has decided to reduce its bond purchases, but it has left the market guessing as to the amount. It will not specify amounts until the next meeting in July. The decision led to selling of the yen as investors were primed for details at this meeting. The BOJ stood pat on other policies. It kept the overnight call rate between 0 and 0.1%. The Nikkei posted modest gains. Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
French bonds have continued to tumble as Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party leads polls ahead of legislative elections later this month. The spread between French and German 10-year yields widened to close at 70 basis points yesterday. That's the most since 2017. Concerns that Le Pen would usher in looser fiscal policies are driving the market reaction. The National Rally's plans in the 2022 presidential election would have cost €120 billion a year, according to a think tank close to Emmanuel Macron. Meanwhile, France's left-leaning political parties sealed an alliance on Thursday evening to join forces in that upcoming vote. Polls suggest that that group can win the second biggest bloc behind Le Pen.
Here in the UK, Nigel Farage's Reform UK party has overtaken the Conservatives in a new opinion poll for the first time 20 days ahead of the general election. The YouGov survey gives the right-wing party 19% of the vote share behind Keir Starmer's Labour, which leads with 37%, and 1 point ahead of the Tory party, which is on 18%. Speaking during a party leaders' debate on ITV last night, Farage criticised Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's party.
I don't believe a single word that you say. And as for being a Labour enabler, we are now ahead of you in the national polls.
OK, thank you.
A vote for you is actually now a vote for Labour.
Reform UK leader Nigel Farage speaking there. Most other opinion pollsters still place the Conservative Party in second place, but show Reform UK gaining ground.
Well, sticking with UK politics, the Labour Party released their party manifesto. Keir Starmer's plans for government focused on economic growth and domestic security. Speaking at the party's official launch event, the Labour leader says his party presents a new opportunity.
Today, we can turn the page. Today, we can lay a new foundation of stability. And on that foundation, we can start to rebuild Britain.
Labour's Keir Starmer speaking there. Included in the party's pitch for government is a plan to raise taxes on private equity fund managers by treating carried interest as income, a change that Labour says will raise £565 million a year.
Tesla investors have backed a $56 billion pay deal for CEO Elon Musk, along plans to move the company's state of incorporation to Texas. Shareholder support for the plans was announced during the firm's annual general meeting on Thursday, to applause from attendees.
Our stockholders have approved the ratification of the 100% performance-based stock option award to Elon Musk that was approved by stockholders in 2018.
Brendan Earhart, Tesla General Counsel, speaking there. Despite showing 73% of investors are in favour of the move, the pay vote is only advisory and doesn't guarantee Musk will receive the package. A Delaware judge nullified the 2018 compensation plan in January. Tesla's expected to appeal. If that fails, moving Tesla's legal home to Texas would allow the board to revive a pay award.
Euros 2024 begins with Scotland looking to cause a shock against host Germany in the opening match of the tournament. Tonight, the three-time champions haven't lost to the Scots since 1999 and beat them in the previous two meetings at major tournaments. So ending on some sporting news this morning. Now, in a moment, we will be talking about the Bank of Japan decision, which was quite a surprise to markets. Most of them had been expecting that we would hear about the bond buying pullback from the BOJ today, at least half of economists surveyed by Bloomberg. The G7 summit's also taking place in Italy. But of course, you were yesterday, I spot from social media, at a big business event in the UK in Oxfordshire. It looked lovely and leafy and green. Who did you talk to?
Yeah, I was at Soho Farmhouse for Founders Forum. It's the flagship event of Founders Forum. And I have to say, it's an incredible gathering of people. Quite a nice reprieve, actually, from covering the general election, Caroline. I was my first guest on stage was an AI robot artist who I would have to say had more charisma in her little finger than all of the politicians put together. But it was we had just a really interesting message coming out of the guests on my stage. We had that AI robot artist. Then we had Deepak Chopra, who you might know as one of the gurus of our century. You know, lots of podcasts and books, really synonymous with meditation. And he was really optimistic about AI, actually. And then I heard from lots of different investors and founders across the spectrum of tech this message that AI is going to be a tide that lifts all boats across industries. But once that's happened, it all comes back to human creativity. And Deepak Chopra's message was creativity is the path to happiness. So I'm feeling very zen this morning, Caroline.
Oh, lovely stuff. That sounds great. Well, yes, and the AI sort of optimism. I mean, whether the UK can deliver on that will be one of the major challenges in terms of the post-election world. I mean, I think it's also interesting that JP Morgan yesterday were talking about how AI, it's not just about investing in the direct AI companies. It's now about the read across into those first adopters, basically early adopting companies, and whether their share price will do well. JP Morgan saying effectively yes. That was very interesting. But nice to hear that you were out and about and speaking to interesting and important business guests. Let's also turn our attention though to the bond markets, of course, because whilst you were out yesterday, the big bond market stories really hit, didn't they? Two of them. This morning, the Bank of Japan putting off reducing its bond buying until July. And then also we had the big spike in yield differentials between France and Germany, given the concerns about Marine Le Pen's national rally winning power in the French elections. Joining us now to discuss this is Garfield Reynolds, our Markets Live Asia team leader. Garfield, really good to speak to you this morning.
Yeah, hi.
In terms of the Bank of Japan, going very, very slowly when it comes to normalising their policy. Why?
Well, the Bank of Japan remains extremely concerned not to set off major turmoil in its bond markets. Given it owns more than half of the bond market, it spent so much money on keeping conditions loose. And while it acknowledges that it needs to turn towards tighter conditions, it's not willing to do that rapidly. It also, it also remains very concerned that there have been signs that inflation is slowing down from where it is. And the official language is it's not confident that inflation is going to remain sustainably above the 2% a year target that it has set. So both of those reasons mean that it is acting cautiously. There's also, an institutional bias against, acting too soon before it's totally sure that it has ultimately irrevocably broken the back of the deflationary mindset that had hold of Japan for generations.
So the BOJ in wait-and-see mode. I'm looking at the yen at 158 per dollar. Is this a catalyst for further weakening?
Definitely. I mean, the yen, had only risen before this by about 2% against the dollar since Japan spent a record amount at the beginning of this month. Beginning of last month, in fact, intervening to prop up the yen. So that propping up the yen has not really done much. And with even with US yields declining this week because of softer CPI, the fact that the Fed has made it clear it's some way away from cutting and that it would be a reluctant rate cutter this year anyway, that was already maintaining pressure on the yen. Now there's more pressure on the yen. It's back, the dollar-yen rate is back above 158. It was 160 when they intervened last time. So at the very least, traders are going to be on the lookout for any signs that the Ministry of Finance might tell the BOJ to step in to defend Japan's currency once more.
Meanwhile, here in Europe, Garfield, the snap election called by Emmanuel Macron in France has unleashed this real wave of concerns in bond markets especially. Why are they so worried about a Marine Le Pen national rally win in the kind of parliamentary vote?
Well, the basic reason they're worried there is that Le Pen's party is seen as being likely to push for more spending, for a much looser fiscal setting. And remember, even before the European elections and what followed, we had S&P saying they didn't like what was going on with France's debt metrics. We had concerns that Macron, with his existing parliamentary setup, was tending towards more fiscal spending. So there was a concern there already that France's budget was not in great shape. That has been exacerbated massively by both the potential that Le Pen parties could win, also the potential that if they don't win, if Macron's parties retain control of the government, they're still going to feel under pressure to be more populist, to open the public purse strings.
And so you settle something for us, would you? Is Le Mair's warning of a Liz Truss scenario overblown?
Possibly. I mean, one of the things that made the Liz Truss scenario so extraordinary was that it came to some extent out of a blue sky. So, we've already had a pretty strong jump in French yields, especially relative to bonds, which is the best way of measuring what's going on in European bond markets. So we've already had a lot of pain there. It would be hard to see if that hasn't set off major turmoil, pension funds dumping oats, that sort of thing. That reduces the chances that you would get more. Then again, if we did get a Le Pen victory and they did really push hard on the fiscal front, that there would be the potential for at least some short-term turmoil and and some spikes in yields. It's quite possible that the bond market, so to speak, would signal its very strong disapproval. It all then gets down to just how bad it gets. That depends on whether there are any hidden dangers, the way that it turned out there were in the British bond market, where, remember the problem was that pensions who had, gone very long duration effectively, suddenly found that they were caught out and they had to liquidate positions. That's the sort of thing that we kind of don't know until, we get more of a stress test from the political front. We don't know whether anything like that is waiting for us in France's bond market.
OK, Garfield, thank you so much for being with us this morning. That is our Markets Live Asia team leader, Garfield Reynolds, taking us through the bond market story. Let's turn quickly to the G7 leaders, though, in Apulia in Italy for their annual summit yesterday. They agreed to a deal that will use profits generated by frozen Russian sovereign assets to provide an upfront loan to Ukraine. Joining us now for more on the deal and also what we expect on day two today, Bloomberg's Europe correspondent at large, Alberto Nardelli. Good morning, Alberto. I mean, the significance in terms of the funds for Ukraine from seized Russian assets, does it move forwards quickly? It's been discussed for months.
It should. So the leaders yesterday reached this agreement, and as part of that pledge, they want to see money flowing to Ukraine by the end of this year. And so it's once they were able to sort out and iron out the details, the implementation should be fairly quick from now on.
And we were just talking to Garfield Reynolds about Emmanuel Macron's decision to call a snap election, angering G7 leaders and the effect on the bond market. But I wonder whether the French president's fallen out of favour. What's the sense on the ground there, Alberto?
I think the main word is there's a bit of puzzlement. Like, I've spoken to quite a few officials here, and the one question everyone asked was why. It's not clear why President Macron has decided to call this election, and everyone I've spoken to sees it as a very risky move, and the rationale and the reasons for doing it are unclear, really, and it hasn't really emerged what is the upside in having called this election.
Mind you, it's not as if the G7 are short of leaders under pressure. Rishi Sunak, Olaf Scholz are there. Just in terms of the agenda today, a word on migration. That's the theme, isn't it?
Yes, migration obviously is a very big issue in Italy, which is hosting the summit, but also elsewhere in Europe, especially as we saw in the recent European election results of this big shift to the right. So much of the focus will indeed be on migration. It will be also on developing infrastructure energy plans with African countries. There's a food security initiative which is going to be unveiled also with African countries, and there are lots of hopes. So today is the day where the G7 leaders will meet with leaders of other countries, including Africa.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.